Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Nasser, and this is the Cleveland C# VB.NET user group. A little bit about the group. We meet every month. The meetings are free of charge and open to the public, and we cover a variety of topics related to .NET. You can find meeting information posted on meetup.com for both past meetings as well as future meetings at the link listed at the bottom of the slide. Would like to give a big thank you to our sponsors, Tech Systems and Inedo, for back in the good old days when we met in person, and soon to come when we do meet in person.
Pizza, where's my pizza?
It'll be shipped to you. Keep an eye out for it. I would also like to give a big thank you to PostSharp and DevExpress for the prizes that will be available using the evaluation forms that will be made available later. And also like to give a big thank you to NIS Technologies for the web hosting. A special offer to all the members of the group. We have a 35% off at manning.com using the discount code MTPCLEC21. And you can find a selection of books available at the link listed there. And that link will also be available in the chat. And there's Kathleen Dollard. Hi, Kathleen.
Kathleen Dollard.
How are you?
Now, and I've hardly seen her all week because she works for Microsoft, which means she's in meetings like 10 hours a day.
Well, glad you could pop in. It's a nice little surprise.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everybody. Good to say hello.
We still have VB.NET in our title, so just an FYI, if you ever want to talk about VB.NET here, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, all right. Okay, well, I am gonna sneak off.
Have fun. She's going out to dinner with my husband and their friends, and our friends.
I am.
Okay. And then you'll be catching up later, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Some general information. Please keep in mind, participation is encouraged. The only stupid question is the one not being asked. So feel free to jump in at any point in time with a question, either verbally or in the chat window. However, when not speaking, kindly ask you to mute your microphones just to avoid any background noise. And always keep it casual but organized. So the floor is always open for questions and comments. But at the same time, we want to give time for our presenter to go through slides and demos. And lastly, the presentation will be recorded and on YouTube, so feel free to check that out later. And for tonight's feature presentation, we have Julie Leerman. Julie is a Microsoft Regional Director. She's also a Docker Captain and a Microsoft MVP. She is the coach and consultant to software teams worldwide. She presents on Entity Framework and domain-driven design. You can find her speaking at user groups and conferences worldwide. And she always blogs at thedatafarm.com/blog. And if you've worked with Microsoft.NET or Entity Framework for any point in time, you'll know that she is the highly acclaimed author of Programming Entity Framework books, the MSDN Data Points column, and popular videos on Pluralsight. So with that, I'd like to welcome you, Julie. Glad to have you. And let me make you presenter.
Thank you, Sam. I always feel like I need to hear the music from the dating game in the background when somebody's reading my bio. Of course, there's only some of you might be way too young to have any idea what I'm talking about.
I was just going to say, let's just keep that one between us. But,
All right. So this talk is about some of the the most interesting and exciting features of Entity Framework Course 6, which is funny because now the team is talking all the time about EF Course 7. But we're all still maybe learning EF Course 6. And this talk focuses on the features that are probably the most interesting to the greatest number of people using it. Believe me, there's a gazillion other, there's so many other things that fascinate many people, but not as many people each one. So I'm sticking to the big ones. My website's thedatafarm.com, and I'm on Twitter as Julie Lerman. And also just want to say, ever since I started on Twitter, I don't blog quite as much, so just so you know. Also, this is my big news. I just recently, this month, published my Pluralsight course on EF Course 6. So if anybody's watched the earlier ones, they've been like getting started, EF Core 5 getting started, EF Core 3 getting started. And their Pluralsight's kind of gotten rid of, they're not going to do getting started courses. So fundamentals is the getting started, but it's bigger. It's a little broader, covers more things. It is 7.5 hours long. I've never done a course that big before, but I was so happy to have the leeway to talk about the things that I wanted to talk about instead of saying, yeah, you got to keep it under 2.5 hours. And then it's so basic, right? So I get to get a little deeper into a bunch of topics. So that came out at the beginning of May, and that's the shortcut for that. So what I'm going to focus on here is changes that really have a big impact for people. Some changes that have been requested a lot. Some of them since the very beginning of Entity Framework, but also some of them, as we transition from Entity Framework 6 into EF Core, and a bunch of things didn't make it in because, they were rewriting the whole thing from scratch. So there was a lot going on. So some of the things that we've been waiting for also came back in EF Core 6. And then just a couple of other things that I think are worth mentioning. So I'll, do some demos and some slides, and, I like to dig into the code. So that's always fun. Just for fun, I want to say next slide, please, even though I'm the one doing it. So I think it's really important to understand about the cadence of the releases, and they do EF Core releases. The cadence of that aligns with the cadence of .NET. So EF Core 5 came out when .NET 5 came out. EF Core 6 came out when .NET 6 came out. So EF Core 5 was at the end of 2020, EF Core 6 was in 2021, and it's no promise that it's going to be every single November that we get new versions, but in this case, yes, .NET 7 is coming out the end of this year, and EF Core 7 will come along with that. And another thing to be aware of, and don't shoot the messenger here, you might be familiar with the long-term service releases, long-term support releases versus the current releases that aren't LTS. EF Core, so it's every other one, so that the even number ones are long-term support. So EF Core 5 was not a long-term support, so its support, it doesn't mean they're pulling it out and you can't use it anymore, but like the official support that you can get from Microsoft just ended. And so they're like, if you were using EF Core 5 and you really do need to rely on support from Microsoft, you should upgrade to EF Core 6. And it's the same story with .NET 5 to .NET 6. And there's some, great benefits from it, and breaking changes really at a minimum, and also not anything that's going to impact a lot of people. But all that stuff is listed in the EF Core documentation. They're very, very clear and very transparent about that. So EF Core 6 support, is going to go through the end of 2024. EF Core 3.1 support is still through the end of this year. I just think that's important for people to understand. And I also understand like this idea that EF Core 6 and .NET 6 got released in November, and then 6 months later, the support for the previous version goes away, right? Which is like, that's pretty scary to people because not everybody can move that quickly. But that's just the way it is. But they're still, this is like the official support. This isn't like getting questions answered on GitHub issues and things like that. So it's still important to understand. So another few high-level things. This isn't about features, but just some high-level things to understand about EF Core 6. EF Core 6 runs on .NET 6, not previous versions. It does not run on .NET 5. It does not run on .NET Standard. So this is a break for being able to use EF Core with .NET Framework, right? Because .NET Framework was supported by .NET Standard or ran on top of .NET Standard, so you could do the two together. But it's not supported on .NET Standard either. And .NET Standard doesn't exist in .NET 6, so it is .NET 6 that you need to run, not just run, but to develop on. And what you're going to develop in is Visual Studio 2022, Windows or Mac, Visual Studio Code or JetBrains Writer, but not older versions of Visual Studio. They won't work. They don't run on .NET 6, right? So those things all go together. Visual Studio 2022 goes together with .NET 6, and therefore you need that combination to work with and or run EF Core 6. So just getting that out of the way. Now we get into the fun stuff, the features. So performance, specifically query performance, was a really big deal for EF Core 6. Now, .NET 6 also brought a lot of performance, but EF Core 6 also made a lot of its own big leaps in performance. But again, specifically for querying, that was the focus of the performance work for EF Core 6. And the way that the team focused on it, they said, we need a target to like something to aim for. And what they aimed for was trying to see if they can get the performance on par with Dapper. Not that EF Core competes with Dapper, right? There's a lot of reasons, a lot of times when you might even want to use both, right? Use the right tool for the job. But Dapper for queries had always been faster. That was always something people would compare, right? It's like here's a .NET ORM that a lot of people use, and hey, it's faster than EF Core. So EF Core worked really hard. The team worked really hard, especially Shai Rajansky. Shai on the team was really the go-to guy who was really hammering on this. And then in order to have measurements, like, well, how are we comparing it? They used an industry standard. The Tech Empower Fortunes is an industry standard for measuring the performance of frameworks, applications on frameworks. And so it's not just using the Fortunes benchmark. It's not just measuring EF Core. It's a whole framework. Like, an application has to be executing EF Core. So in this case, what they were comparing was the combination of .NET 6, ASP.NET Core 6, and EF Core 6. That was what the measurement was. And overall, with that combination, the tests that they did were 70% faster than .NET 5. So some of that comes from .NET 6 and ASP.NET Core 6. But like EF Core 6, when they just focused on measuring that part, that in those tests was about 30% faster than the queries EF Core, the same EF Core queries with EF Core 5. So that's a really big deal, really big improvement. To understand that a little better, this grid is a screenshot from the team's blog post about that. And as a matter of fact, I'm just going to go back. Here's the link down here, the team blog post, EF Core 6 perf. I made that nice little bit.ly link. So that's where that comes from, and that's where this comes from. So I just want you to understand when I talk about it's faster, like what's faster. So their starting point, the same test, right? It's the same test, just on different, on .NET 5 versus on .NET 6, etc. So they started their measurement using EF Core 5. It does say EF 5, but it's EF Core 5. EF Core 5 and .NET 5. So that's where they were. EF Core had 147,852 reads per second, and Dapper had almost over 230,000. So there was a gap in their speed of over 50%. Dapper was over 50% faster in the scenario with ASP Net Core, EF Core, and .NET 5. So that was the starting point. Then the first thing they did was they looked at the specifications for the tests a little more closely, and they actually tweaked the tests, not to cheat, but to get them on par with how everybody, the way everybody else was getting their measurements. And so doing that, they actually reduced the gap dramatically. So, when you're talking about that 70% overall change, just the tests made 30%, made the whole kit and caboodle 30% faster. Then they went from .NET 5 to .NET 6. That, again, made it about 10% faster. And the gap between EF and Dapper was about 25% at that point. So then the next thing is really going to show where EF Core 6 is having an impact. So they're already on .NET 6 and ASP Net Core 6, but now they add in the new APIs for EF Core 6, and there it really the reads per second popped up dramatically, and now the gap between EF Core and Dapper was only 4.5% in this very specific scenario defined by the Tech Empowers Fortunes benchmarks test. Like, you have to do the test on certain equipment in certain scenarios, and you have to write them in exactly the same way. So everybody's comparing apples to apples. So honestly, so overall, by looking at it this way, the performance improved from EF Core 5 to EF Core 6 in this scenario over 30%, and that was huge. And again, this is just for queries, and that's what the Tech Empower Fortunes tests. It tests queries. And the other interesting thing is, so they learned a lot, right? But they really focused on the queries. EF Core 7, they're going to make the same focus now on persistence, on saving, right? And see how they can make that faster, all the different places they can make that faster. Matter of fact, recently the EF Core team does stand-ups, and they're all on YouTube under the .NET YouTube channel. And there was one recently where Shai went through like the kinds of things places he would look to say, we could probably change how this works under the covers, and the kinds of things he did to make the improvements. And of course, I found that absolutely fascinating. So I am not going to be running tests to show you that, but I did do my own little baby benchmarking, not anything like what they're doing. Also, so I'll show you that in a minute, but these are some of the places where they made the tweaks. So with pooling and recycling, so for example, we've always had DB context pooling. So now it also does more for DB connections and DB commands and data readers and some other internal objects. So pooling those when they can be pooled and not having to spin things back up again. Logging and interception points, they changed how often they're checking to see what's going on, right? Like maybe they were doing it like 100 times a second. Now they're doing it like 10 times a second, right? But or one second. So they changed their perspective on that, and so even if you're not using interception or using logging, it still is pushing out. It's still going check, and if you ask to have that information, then it gives it to you. So even if you're not using it, you're still going to get the benefit of the work that they did there. And then the other interesting thing is they gave a way to opt out of thread safety checking. So you definitely want to do thread safety checking when you're designing, but maybe by the time it's deployed and you're not testing anymore and it's runtime, you don't need to do that anymore, right? And you can actually opt out of that, and that will change runtime performance a lot. So those are the big ones that they did. And again, there's another link on this slide where you can, really look into the details where it's all listed, all the different things they did, if you're like me, like fascinated by it. So again, not only was this about queries, but it was this focus this time around was for non-tracking queries. So with EF Core 7, not only are they going to also attack the actual persistence, but they're also going to now focus on queries as they're being tracked. So all that work that the change tracker, that the context is doing to keep change tracking entities, objects that it's paying attention to, right? So when it's non-tracking, which is most common, that's like in websites and stuff, right? You just send it down to a browser and you're not tracking it anymore, right? So you don't need to do all that work of spinning up tracking objects, etc. So now they're going to see how they can make that faster. That's what they're working on for EF Core 7. So I did not do the Tech Empowers tests. I actually asked, I was like, can I run that code? And Shai was like, he politely didn't laugh at me, but you have to have like these special kind of servers and there's all kinds of stuff. So what I did was just my own little tiny test. Let me just flip over. And Shai actually helped me build this test, and he's got examples of it all, something like this also. But what this test is doing is really trying to get all of the things like instantiating the context, compiling the query, just get all that stuff out of the way, right? No tracking query, things like that. So getting all of those things out of the way, and then I have a couple of different tasks that I'm testing. And I also have pooling on, right? So I'm getting all the benefits I can. And then I have one test where I'm querying 1,000 rows, and then another test where I'm querying 1 row. But I'm not just running this and starting a timer and counting and everything. I'm actually using benchmark.net, which is amazing because it will take your code that you're running and it'll run it like a whole lot of times, like you need to do for benchmarks. It'll do warm-up things, and and it'll do lots of iterations, and it'll throw out the highs and throw out the lows, and give you give you the results that are the most common. So even when I did that, I just thought it was interesting. First, I also did not want the difference between .NET 5 and .NET 6 to impact what I was doing. So I ran this on EF Core 5, using EF Core 5 on .NET 6. And then I used the same code using EF Core 6 also on .NET 6. So the only difference was EF Core 5 or EF Core 6. And I thought it was interesting that looking at the 1,000 rows, there was a huge difference. So here's 3,000 microseconds it took on EF Core 5, and about 1,500 microseconds. So about half the time that, with my little backyard test, it took about half the time to execute the query with 1,000 rows. The query with 1 row, there's no difference because it's not doing anything. There's no effort there. Anyway, so I needed to see it myself. I needed to try it myself, not just look at the blog post and go, oh yeah, that's right. So now you're just gonna listen to me going, yes, it works, and you can just go, oh yeah, okay, whatever, right? But I'm like that. I just have to see it myself. So the non-tracking queries, right? That's where the big gain was this time around. And again, that difference between in a very specific scenario, the difference between EF Core 6 and Dapper, which just went down, from like Dapper Dapper was twice as fast. Now Dapper was only like 4% faster. So that was huge. And it was great that they had a target. So the next thing about performance that I wanted to talk about was startup performance. So that was query performance, but startup performance can also be an issue if you have large data models. Now, I'm somebody who also spends a lot of time with domain-driven design, and I'm like, large data models, why would you ever have a large data model? You have to have bounded contexts and, things, small, solvable problems. But you know what? There are a lot of applications that, for very good reasons, do have large data models, right? So, the team couldn't say, well, you shouldn't have them anyway, so we don't care. They care. And as a matter of fact, in EF6, I'm trying to remember, I wonder if it came in EF5. There was a point in the lifetime of Entity Framework where we had the ability to pre-compile the models so that at runtime, Entity Framework didn't have to go through that effort of figuring out, reading the context and doing all that work. So they brought it back, but they didn't just redo what they did before. They have a much better way now. So for those of you who are not aware of that effort and how that affects performance, when does Entity Framework build its in-memory data model? So, create its understanding of what the DB context is describing, what the entities are, how they map to your database, right? All of that information that it needs in order to understand how to build, transform your link queries into SQL, how to materialize objects, how to build SQL to do safes, right? It needs the data model in order to understand that. So when that happens, it's not when you instantiate the DB context. It's once the DB context is existing, it's that first time you ask EF Core to actually do something with the database, whether it's a query or you're calling save changes. So that very first time, that's when it says, oh, wait a minute, I need to know what the data model looks like before I can construct that SQL. And then once that happens, the first time in the application instance that's done, it stays, it's cached in the application instance. So it doesn't ever do it again throughout the lifetime of the application instance for that DB context. So if you have multiple DB contexts, then it has to do those the first time as well. So it's just that one time, but that one time could be really painful for, the user who drew the short straw on this one, right? Like maybe maybe you've got a web application or a web API and it's deployed across, a number of servers or a number of containers, right? And so there's more users, a new container is getting spun up, and the first person using that new container is going to pay the price of that model building, that in-memory compilation. So the ability to have it pre-compiled and ready to go in those scenarios is really, really important for people who have huge models. So Arthur Vickers, and Arthur is on the Entity Framework team, like the the program manager, lead engineer, I think. He's brilliant guy. Everybody on the team is really freaking smart. So he built a model, built a demo that has a crazy huge model, huge model, so he could really hammer on this and see the difference between getting that data model spun up in memory on the fly the first time the context uses it versus compiling it in advance and having the application use that already compiled model. So he had this big model, he had 450 different types in it, and between them, across them, almost 6,400 properties. And like every huge legacy database, 720 relationships, right? It's really, really big. So when he ran this, and these numbers are also coming. You can download the sample. So I ran his demo on my computer. And this also, if you recognize this output, this is also using benchmark.net. Can you tell I'm pointing at the screen? This is using benchmark.net. So this is on the fly, and what he was measuring was the time it took to get to the time it took to run that very first query, right? Once that was triggered. So here, the mean that was calculated by benchmark.net was 1.8, and the mean when using the precompiled model was 157 milliseconds. So it was like 11 times faster. It's huge, huge improvement. So what I want to do is, well, first I better show you how to do it. So whether you're using the CLI or using PowerShell, using the commands in Visual Studio, the key word there is optimize, right? So it's either .NET EFDB context optimize that will build a precompiled version of the model, or you use optimize-db context, and it creates a folder that has the optimized model files. So, and I can show you, I think I have it open. Yeah, I have it open over here. This is Arthur's benchmark demo, just so you know what that looks like. And what I want to show you is, here are all the entities. He didn't give them all kinds of real names, right? But here are all the entities in here, zillions and zillions and zillions. And so the way you go from the entities to the compiled models is using that command. And what I'll do is I'll show you this. I'll actually show this to you using a tiny little model, but I'm not going to show you the benchmarks with a tiny model because there's no point. It's not really going to make any difference. But I want you to see the assets that are created and how to use them. So I'm using Visual Studio Code, so I'll use the command line. So it creates a folder that has all of these optimized model files in them, and then you tell the context to you that when it's time to build the data model in memory, use the optimized model files that already know everything it needs to know about what the model should look like, instead of having to go through the process of figuring it out. And so those are the two steps. You just say, compile the model, and then that becomes part of the code base, and then you use the model. And this is what it's going to avoid. So I don't know if you know this. This is the kind of stuff I'd love. When it does that compilation, EF Core has to read the DB context, discover all the classes that are referenced there. And some of them, they're not all going to be, maybe not all in DB sets. They might be just classes that are referenced by the ones that are in DB sets, or you have some configuration. But it has to discover all of the entities that should be in there. Then it goes and reads them and figures out what the mappings are using its default. Then it reads all of your configurations that you've added. And then it's able to come up with the data model in the end. So that's a lot of work. So the pre-compilation goes through all of that process and then spits out, here's everything you need to know about the classes. So make sure you get the right one. Let me close this one because I don't need it anymore. Make sure I'm closing the right one. Yes, it's Arthur's. And here, and I'll go to, this is all on GitHub, by the way. So compiled models before, and I have to do this. No, I didn't want to show output. This silly thing, because I insist on doing this in Visual Studio Code. It seems to not, OmniSharp doesn't seem to be happy when I switch from one, in this scenario of doing demos, when I switch from one branch to another, but it should be okay now. And then I just want to build it. .NET build. Just like, why is that there? Okay, good. Okay, so now it's all cleaned again. So I just have a tiny little model. I don't have 400 types and 800 relationships and all of that. Here's my domain model. I just have this little person table, which has a relationship with addresses table. Person class, which has a relationship with addresses, right? Because it's got a list of addresses. And there's the little address class, and the address class happens to have an enum in it. Use an enum called address type. That's it. And the context has nothing, right? The context, I'm not doing anything extra. So so that all of this will happen quickly, as opposed to, and when I say all this will happen, I mean building the precompiled model will happen a lot more quickly, and it'll be easier to see. So I've already, I've got my models. Everything that it needs to know, I could run this right now. Everything it needs to know to build the data model at runtime and have a context to use exists. So I'll go ahead and precompile it. So that's .NET EF DB context optimize, right? Did I memorize that right? Hey, it seems to be working. Yep. Okay, so notice there's some new stuff over here. And the new stuff is this folder, right? So doing this in Arthur's demo, this folder would have like 800 files in it. So this is a little easier to see. So I have an entity type class for each of my entities, address entity type and person entity type. And what's in here is everything the DB context needs to know about mapping this entity so that it doesn't have to figure it out, right? It's just everything that it would discover if it went through that whole process. It's all just laid out here, so it's just easy. It's like, okay, there it is, I got it. Awesome. And it's the mapping info, right? So it's just, you don't need to know exactly, all of the things that it's doing, but it's just a really straightforward version of what what Entity Framework Core needs to know, what the DB context needs to know about that type. And the address entity type also has, what it needs to know about the address entity. And also there's information in here about its relationship somewhere. Oh yeah, so here's like the foreign key, right? Because the EF context has to figure out the foreign key. So the DB context has to spit it out, Julie. I'm talking too fast. Has to understand about the foreign key of address that goes back to the person type. So it's all spelled out here. You don't need, you don't even need to ever look at these, but of course I always find it all interesting. But that's part of what it created. And there's two other files in here. One is the people context model builder. So that says, what do I need to know, right? Since it's not going to go to the context, the people context to figure out what the model looks like, it's going to go here to this file. And it says, I need to create address from everything you learn about the address entity in the address entity type file, and person, everything you need to know about it is in the person entity type file. And then finally, there's a people context model, which instantiates the model builder. Okay, and then it just initializes everything and gets it going. So once you've created these, once you've run optimize and created the guts of the compiled models folder, which you never need to look at, what's really nice is notice down here after I ran that command, it says successfully generated a compiled model. To use it, call options use model people context instance. Okay, so what that means is, I'm just going to copy and paste because that makes it easy. In the options builder, I just need to append this use model, right, to the options builder. Now I've got this squiggly line. That's because my compiled model files are in a different namespace. So I'm just going to, oops. Why doesn't it just tell me? Control dot, there we go, use compiled model. Okay, so that just put the namespace up at the top there. Okay, that's it. Now when I run this, it will use the compiled, it will actually use the compiled model. So I'm going to put a couple of breakpoints in here, and I'm going to put them in. I just want you to see that it's really hitting these files. It's using these files. So I'm just randomly putting a breakpoint there, and also I'm going to go to my people context. So just, so we're seeing that happen. And I have a little program here that's going to instantiate my plain old, so I don't need to code differently here, right? I'm just going to instantiate my context, the normal DB context. But when I do that, it will know to use the model. It knows it doesn't have to do all this extra work. So I'm going to instantiate that. I'm deleting and recreating the database just to make it clean. And then I'm going to do an insert. And then when I'm done with the insert, I'm just going to see how many things got added to the database. So that just tells me it all worked, right? It was, I blew away the database. I'm recreating the database, and I'm doing some work against the DB context. And it will work because it knows, it understands the context. So I'll go ahead and F5 to run it. And I've got those breakpoints in there just to see, so you can see that it really is reading that. So it's, going here. Here we are inside the address entity type, right? So it's definitely reading that. I'll just keep running. And now it added 2 things to the database, right? So there's a lot more deep stuff I can do to like prove to you that it really worked. But, to me, that's proof enough. Like, it worked. It read the model. So again, Arthur's demo is the one where you're going to really see the performance benefit of doing it, right? That's the whole reason you do it. If you have a really big model and it's taking a long time to do that first effort. So that's why you would do it. I just wanted you to see what it looks like and how it works, and yes, that it really does work. So that is a really big deal for a lot of people. And now I can't see my screen. Oh, that's where I want to go. There we go. All right. Was that either of those like interesting to anybody? Oh, I see chat. What's the difference between .NET 6 and ASP.NET Core 6? Oh, somebody already answered that. Thank you, Sean. Thanks for the question. Okay, does anybody have any other questions about what I've done so far, or just like, is anybody looking at those 2 things and thinking that they're going to be useful, good benefit for them, like especially like with the big models? And I'm just looking in the chat, or yeah, because nobody's got mics on, nobody's got cameras on. I'm all alone here. Okay, well, I'm just going to keep, oh, definitely. Thanks, Brad. Yeah, so, again, for me, I like ask the team, I was like, why do we need pre-compiled models? Nobody should have big models. And they're like, Julie, don't be ridiculous. Of course, people have big models and they need this. So they do. It's great. So the next thing I want to talk about, it's not performance, but for anybody doing DevOps and trying to deal with migrations when they're deploying their apps, especially deploying apps to the web or to the cloud, right? And you've got to deploy the migrations along with your changes. It's definitely a problem. And everybody, people have been trying to come up with nice ways to do this over the years. And there's, there are some good ways to do it, but there are also some bad ways to do it. And this I think is one of the most common misconceptions with respect to how do we solve this problem that people aim for. They will just run. There is actually a command, in the API. There's a command to execute migrations. It's migrate command, and a lot of people say, well, I just need to make sure it gets migrated when the application starts up with a new migration. And the problem with that is if you have more than one instance of your app running, so, if you're in a cloud environment or it could be on premises also, but you have multiple instances. So example, again, maybe you're using Docker containers, right? And you're expanding how many people can access your application at once. There's a good chance that you'll have a conflict because there might be multiple apps starting up at the same time and they're trying to migrate at the same time, and all heck would break loose. So that's really a real anti-pattern. Even in the docs, the team is like, please don't do this. Even if you're like, oh, I'm never going to have that scenario. I'm never going to have more than one. It's just like, it's just not a good way to go, not a good way to go about it. Another option, which I like this option a lot for a lot of scenarios, is to get the SQL script and feed it to a tool that knows how to do migrations. I really like FlyawayDB, and I've actually done a presentation on using FlyawayDB to, in CI/CD when you're doing, deployments and testing, etc., where you can use FlyawayDB to deploy the SQL that will perform the schema changes from a container. Like FlyawayDB runs in a container even, right? So we feed the SQL script to FlyawayDB, and there's other tools like that as well. So that's another option a lot of people go for, especially when they've got like a really an actual database guru on the team, right? That can really just handle that stuff for them. A new feature, and we never really had this in any version of Entity Framework. I've been using Entity Framework so long, I cannot say the word any without accidentally saying entity. We've never had any version of this before. So with the EF Core 6, we have the ability to bundle the migrations into an executable and deploy that bundle, and then just have one process execute that bundle with all the migrations. So I'll explain a little more. So first of all, what does it mean to bundle a migration? So it's combining all of the logic. If you have one migration, or you have 10 migrations or 20 migrations that you've created over the course of evolving your application and the scheme of your database and your model. So it combines them all into an executable that also knows how to run migrations, like you would do with the command line, right? How you would update database, right? So it basically puts them all together and can call update database for you. One thing, I won't demo this, but it's really fun demo, but it takes a while, is that the executable that it creates is idempotent. So it has all the migrations in there and can, can figure out which ones need to be executed. So that's really important, because I didn't see anything about that. So I was like, I have to test that. And then once it's deployed, then you have something, maybe in your CI/CD process that just triggers that executable to run. So that's what it means by, it's bundling them, and then you deploy the bundle. So the way we bundle it, again, it's a command line thing, either at the CLI.NET EF Migrations bundle, or if you're using Visual Studio, PowerShell, it's bundle-migrations. And you can also target the output, in other words, the name of the file. Otherwise, the file name is EF bundle. You can also use a parameter to make it self-contained. That's going to be a much bigger exe because that will have .NET runtime in it, so that you don't, so when you deploy the file, you wouldn't, in that case, you wouldn't even need to deploy it onto, for example, a container that's running .NET, right? It can just do the whole thing all by itself. And then the force parameter is just to overwrite the file if you need to do that. So it creates a file called efbundle, and depending on the operating system, it would be efbundle.exe. So let me show you what that looks like. This is fun. Over here, now I have to do this switching. And I know if I was using Visual Studio for this, I wouldn't have this little problem that I have when I go back and forth to different, no, I don't want to stash. I want to lose all the changes. Discard everything. Thank you. Okay, so bundles. And yes, I know, Control-Alt-O, and then just rebuild it, just to get everything cleaned up again. Okay, so I just have simple little migration. Again, it's the same domain model as before. It's just the person type and the addresses type and the little enum of, I mean, the addresses and the little enum for address types. I don't know why I felt I needed to put it in there. I was like, this model's too simple. I have to do something interesting with it. Oh, Sean. Hi, Sean. Do you ever have the EF migrations history table in production? Yes, if you run migrations in production, then the migration history table will be there. And that's how EF Core is able to figure out what's been run and what hasn't been run. So yeah, that gets created in whatever database you run migrations on. I hope that's helpful. So simple domain models. And I just have one migration in here, right? Just to create that, whatever, just a little simple thing. So I will go ahead and create the bundle. So .NET EF migrations bundle. So it's building, that's just building, first it was just building the project, now it's building the bundle. Doesn't take that very long. Just about 20 minutes or so. I'm kidding. This happened earlier, I don't know why. And I ran it a second time and then it worked. And I have to say, I've seen there's a lot of chatter on GitHub with people having, in certain scenarios, having issues with bundle. Who knows, maybe I'm hitting it right now. Oh, come on, it worked twice in a row before. All right, here's another. I'm just going to close and open this again. I haven't seen this. This hasn't embarrassed me in a long time, but it's going to embarrass me now.
Could it be because the exe already exists and it couldn't overwrite it?
No, it's not there. I trashed it. Come on. It's because I didn't cross my fingers.
Are you wishing for good luck or are you flashing a gang sign?
No, these are crossed fingers. No gang sign.
I got a question for you if you want to take it now.
No, I'm just mad. Well, okay, let me pay attention to this for a second.
Sure.
Developer's best friend. Well, I think in private, I usually use one finger from each hand instead of two. Like, okay, what? Think. Why is this suddenly being so mean to me? So let's see, do the Control-O. I'm going to .NET clean. I'm going to .NET build. So you know why this is happening? It's because I had to mention that there is chatter on GitHub, people having issues with this in weird scenarios. And this isn't a weird scenario. And I did have this happen earlier. It's just, it didn't work, and then it did work. I won't try too many more times, but I think the fact that it's taking this long is when it's having a problem. Ah, poo. Oh well. I'm glad this isn't a build demo. Wouldn't that suck if I was demoing this at build? I would skip the demo knowing that there's problems. Okay, Sam, question.
So with the efbundle.exe that you're building, can you put in logic so that if the migration fails, it falls back to a specific migration, or can you put in any additional custom logic, whatever that may be?
You can't do anything to affect the bundle itself. It's just going to run the migrations. And I haven't experienced what it would do. I mean, I think it would just it would behave however update database would behave. Because that's really what it's doing. It's just calling, it's got all the files in there, and it's just calling update database.
This way you can just give it to your DevOps people, they run it and be done with it.
Yes, if you can create it. Now I had disable, I've had last year when I had this problem, I had this really weird way of fixing it. It's a total hack. I'm going to try it. Watch this. Wait, are you kidding me? Disable C#? Don't tell Kathleen. Because I'm pretty sure the issue is with OmniSharp. Come on, work this time. Don't embarrass me. And I looked at the errors and I didn't even really read them. Okay, I'm going to do the more important thing. Getting that working again. Can I try it one more time? We've got 2 more hours, right? Just kidding. I just what? Why is it being bratty? I promise this is the last time I'm going to try it. It didn't like my threat. It worked. So I don't know. So you might want to wait until EF Core 7, because I know that Bryce has said that he needs to kind of go back and change some things, because it happens once in a while. But look at once you create it, and this is the problem people are having is in these weird scenarios, and I don't think my scenario is weird creating it. So I don't have.
Hey, Julie?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think you might have knocked your mic in that little celebration.
Made it go away from me? Can you hear it now?
Oh, much better, yeah.
Okay. Oh, it swung around, who knows? Oh yeah, maybe I did that. Anyway, I mean, this is what we do, right? Developers, doesn't work. But anyway, so there it is, right? efbundle.exe. So my database doesn't even exist yet. So I'm just going to run it, and you have to run it this funny way. When you're doing it from there. So notice there's my database now. Okay, so it did get created, and notice it says applying migration. Now, I could really go to town, like I said, for another hour showing you the item potency, but instead I'm just going to run efbundle again and watch the difference with the response. No migrations were applied. The database is already up to date, right? So that's just a quick way of showing you the item potency of that. And do I need to Well, I think I should run the little program that inserts some data just so that you see the database really exists and really works properly. So this is just going to add a person to that database that I just created. And notice I don't have like, didn't I restart it? Didn't I restart C#? I don't know. I don't know. Open database. I'm a professional, right? Okay, so I'm using SQLite and I have the SQLite Explorer extension in Visual Studio Code. So there's people, show table, and there's my data that just got added. So it really created the table, right? The table really exists and I really can work with it, right? And that was based on using the bundle to run the migration for me. So fair enough. So don't ask me, you can look there, look if you want to see what the issues are that people are having with using the bundle, but hey, you just saw it and it'll probably be a lot hardier with EF7. So let's just get away from that. Once you've created it, works great. Oh, and then the other thing I wanted to highlight here is that you can also point to, you can specify the connection, right? The connection string that you want it to hit when you run the bundle, right? So these are the options for creating the bundle, but then you have this connection option also when you're running the bundle. Okay, temporal table support. Now, can even one person tell me that like me, with all 30 plus years of programming, and many of them being with SQL Server, had never heard of temporal table support until the EF Core team started talking about this feature. And I'm just curious, will anybody, I would like to know if there's anybody who's going, oh, finally, temporal table support, hallelujah, or at least did that when they learned about it, the first time they learned about it. So I had never heard of it, but the people who wanted it badly. So temporal tables. So this is really interesting. I hope to more people than just me. What are temporal tables? Temporal tables actually keep track of the history of the data and its changes in the database. But okay, Sam. So Sam, did you know that EF Core 6 had the support, or when you first learned about it, weren't you like totally excited?
Yes, once EF Core supported it, yes. And I learned about temporal tables in 2016 and been waiting for EF support for a while. So glad to hear it.
So it's kind of a funny thing, right? Like there's so many of us who didn't even know what it was, but the people who needed it really needed it, because if you have temporal tables and you have to manage them yourselves with EF Core, it's awful. So EF Core does it. So let me make sure that for those of you who are like me, you understand what temporal tables are. So here's this is a view of a temporal table in SQL Server and SQL Server Management Studio. And another thing to be aware of is so temporal tables it's not a specification, but it's something that is supported by a variety of SQL databases, not just SQL Server, but the ones that do implement it in their own way, and maybe even give them their own names. Anyway, so here's how it looks in SQL Server. The table, here's my people table, and my people table has these columns, but it also has this other thing in it. It's like a subtable called people history. And inside the subtable, the people history table, it's the same columns. okay? So the ID, first name, last name, middle name, those are your real data, but then there's this period end and period start in both of them. And the way it works is that and the database takes care of it. Whenever you insert or update any of that data or delete the data, it will, in the regular table, it will have your data as it is, and then it'll let's say you're inserting. When you insert something, it'll just be you'll just have a row in the regular table. And by default, SQL Server will update the period end and period start for you when you insert that row. So it'll say it started, the start is the moment it got inserted, and the end is like, the 23rd century or something like that. It's a really far off date. Then when you edit it, so if we now edit this person row, what it does is it makes a copy, it's like a snapshot, a copy of what it was, puts that in the history table, and then changes the end date to the moment that it went into the history table. So it still notes the original start date, and then the end date is the moment it went into the history table. And then the updated version then has the new moment of start, and it still has that 28th century, whatever it is, period to end. Okay, for SQL Server, it's important that these are date time too. And if you're doing it manually, you have to create all this. You have to create all this stuff yourself. With EF Core 6, you don't have to do any of it manually. That's the beauty. So in EF Core 6, there's a mapping, a two-table mapping, where you can literally specify that the table is temporal. That's all you have to do. It will take care of the rest. The rest being that when you create the migration, it adds those period start and period end, right? Those period start and period end, those aren't part of your data model. Those aren't part of your domain classes, I mean, right? You don't have to deal with those or think about those or know that they exist. But the migrations make sure that those columns get into the database table when they get created. And migrations also adds the logic needed for creating that history table. So just by saying it is temporal, sorry, I'm pointing to it with my fingers again, but just by saying it is temporal, it will do all of that. And then when you create the SQL, whether you create Sql Script or just execute it, it does all of this for you, right? So it specifies a history table schema, right? And it creates not only the properties that are from your columns, like first name, last name, middle name, ID, whatever those were, it also then creates these other columns. Also notice in the migrations, not only does it say, hey, we need this column, but we also have it also adds an annotation to say, hey, this is the temporal column. This is the temporal column for start. This is the temporal column for ending, right? So then it knows to create them that way. So here's the period end, date time to, generated always as row end, not null, right? So as row end, that's how it knows it's that one. Oh, Sam, so great. You guys can all watch Sam presenting on how hard it was to use temporal tables in EF. So it does all of this for you. All you need to know is just to say table dot is temporal, and it takes care of all that for you. And then remember that SQL Server then takes care of all of the updating and pushing stuff into the pushing the snapshot into the history table and fixing up the period start and period ends. So Entity Framework isn't doing any of that. Entity Framework is just setting up the mappings so that migrations will take care of that. Once that exists, then we also have a whole bunch of link methods for querying against the temporal tables. So you can ignore them, right, and just do regular link, and it will never look in the temporal table. It'll always look in the default regular table. But if you start using the temporal table, the temporal query methods, then it will perform the same logic that there's SQL, like T-SQL has temporal query methods, right? So it will just translate the query properly. So let me show you a little more of this, just because it's so much fun. It's going to be a combination of, oh no, I have to go to a new branch, temporal table support, and I also have, this is going to go away. I'm deleting this database, so we won't see that. But I have just some queries. So this is Azure Data Studio, which is really, really a thing of beauty when you don't need to use all of SSMS. So I already have did the context, created the context, specified that the person table should be temporal, right? That's the only code I had to bother with. I just said it's temporal. Here's the migration that got created, which looks a little like some of the stuff I showed you in the slide. So notice that I just, got to prove it, right? I don't have end date and start date properties in my person table. So back to the migration, because I said it's a temporal table, it added in period end, and here's all of the annotations so that it knows it's temporal and which one it is, if it's the start or the end. You can, by the way, in the context, you can configure these names to be different if you want them to be different, right? Or maybe you already have the temporal tables and you need to make sure that they're matching. So you can definitely configure that. And then here's the other annotations about the table itself being temporal. Now I also created a SQL script from this migration, and I'm just going to show that, right? I just saved it so you can see it, so we don't have to do all that work. So here's the table, people table, and here's the regular columns, and then here are the columns created in the migration for the date times. Remember, row end, as row start, and hidden. So when you do a regular query, you're not going to see these. You have to explicitly ask for them if you want to see those values. No, I don't need to do that right now. Thank you. So those are hidden. SQL Server hides them, right? So NA Framework's not going to see them either. They're not part of your class. So SQL Server by default hides them. Anyway, and with a system versioning history table. And it's going to call it person history, right? So it creates all of that for you. So this, my little application, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have it delete my pre-existing database and recreate it based on the migration, or based on the context. And then I'm going to seed some data. So I'm not going to run the query quite yet. I'm just going to seed some data. And I've got John Smith, Andre Sferret, Andre's on the EF core team, and George Jetson. Again, for those of us over a certain age. I hope everybody of every age loves the Jetsons. Anyway, so I'm just seeding some data. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I've got the query commented out. And so I'm just running that. I screwed something. I really messed something up when I was trying to get that other thing work. So I'm just going to .NET run this also. I'm not going to debug it. There's no need to debug it. It's just my default. Okay, and that's just the logs showing what's going on in the database. So now over to Azure Data Studio. Did I have it on the other screen when I was talking about it before? Anyway, so I'm connected to, still connected to my temporal test table, right? I deleted it and recreated it, so it should be aware of that. And I'm going to, this is old data. I'm going to now just query the people table as I just seeded the data. So there's George Jetson. And you can see that as I seeded the data, right, using EF Core, also this period end and period start got populated. So they're all the same. So period start was, today's date at, exactly the same moment in time. And period end is, not the 23rd century, but the millionth century or the 10,000th century, whatever. Okay, so now I'm just going to use SQL here to just make a quick change to the data. So I'm going to run that. I'm going to update people. I'm going to change the last name from George Jetson to George Jones. Okay, and now I'm going to query, just do a plain old query on here. So here's George Jones now, and SQL Server updated the period start as of this moment in time, the same date, but a second or so, a minute or so later, right? That's when this starts. So it also tucked the earlier version, George Jetson, into the history table. Now that that stuff exists, and I'm going to copy just that. I'm going to go back over to my code. I'm going to uncomment these. I'm going to comment these things. I don't need them running. And I'm going to run this query. So here's the query. The query says, now I got to update it for my new data. Okay, so first the query just does a regular query. Just give me all the people. Then I'm specifying my audit date, right? And I'm just saying the date. What I'm doing is I'm using the time of the time of the first iteration. Actually, no, I have to do it. I have to choose a time that's in between the first set of starts and the second set of second start. So this is 23, 22, 17 and 23, 23. So if I do like 23, 22, 18, right? I want to see what the data looked like at 23, 22, 18. In other words, before I made this change. So 18. If I ask for 17, there will be nothing because that's like a moment before I actually first inserted the data. Okay, so now, if I can't debug, how am I going to show this to you? Why won't it let me debug? Let me think about that. Maybe I should pay attention to the, oh, it's not even letting me set breakpoints. Interesting. Darn, I really messed myself up, didn't I? Okay. Let's just see what happens again. Maybe I'll pay attention to the method. I can't even set a breakpoint here. Install Core CLR extension. How did I? What did I do? I guess I need to install the Core CLR extension just like it was prompting me to. I hope it only takes like a split second. What? Okay, I'm going to close it and open it again. And you're all crossing your fingers. I'm just looking at the adjust message. Okay. Yeah, it's when I disabled OmniSharp, I really messed things up. Oh, please let me debug now. No debugging. Wow. Okay. I'm trying to think how I'm going to display this, or maybe I just swallow my pride and say, believe me, it really works. Should I do that? Sam, do I swallow my pride or I make a quick change to output the data?
I say let's go for a quick change.
Okay. For each one, where's my IntelliSense? Write the code for me. Why isn't that working? For each person P. I had to write VB6 today, so I'm going to do this all. My brain is like totally messed up. In result typical coding, live coding that I didn't plan for. Console write line. Where's console write line? Debug write line. Now I wish I was in Visual Studio. Something is so messed up. All right, let's go to the extensions. And let's go to C# again. It's not. Wait, is it under OmniSharp? No, it should be there. It's not there. That's the problem. Oh my gosh. Didn't you all see me re-enable that? Oh, yay. I know I re-enabled it. No, I'm so ashamed. I've only been programming for 30 years. Okay, so here we go. Now, Sean. Okay, good. Why are we here? Okay. Result typical. George Jones, right? That's just the current. See, Dave saw it too. So George Jones, that's just standard query. But now when I do a temporal query, let's try that again. It pulled back George Jetson, right? And notice also I don't have the end times or start times or anything like that, right? Because that stuff's hidden. It's not part of my domain model. But so again, for those of you like Sam who've been using temporal tables a long time and have been struggling with trying to, manually make EF Core work with it. Now, not just all of that stuff that we get with the migrations thanks to the is temporal mapping, but also being able to have those various ways of querying against it is super, super sweet. And probably others. So those of you who are in the camp of what's a temporal table, I've never heard of it before. Oh my gosh. Maybe now also you're like, whoa, I got to start using those. Those are awesome. So I'm going to take a quick look at the time at 7:30. The rest of what I have to show you is just slides and hand waving. I'm not going to be running any demos and finding the limits of Visual Studio Code and OmniSharp. So this actually is really important to me. I really am a huge fan of this, the ability to specify conventions in a bulk manner and also conversions, value conversions. So has anybody done this before? We have the ability to set column type. But if you want to say set column type on a specific property of a specific class, right? That's easy. But what if you want to say for every string that you find in all of the entities that this DB context is exposing, for every one of those strings, I want to change the column type. Well, there was no way to do it. We would have to iterate through the model builder and use code like this, right? Which was totally unintuitive. And if you'd have to do a whole bunch of Googling to figure out how to do that. So now we have the ability to do these in bulk, to make these bulk configurations, to say, here's the new way, everywhere that you see a property that's a string, we want that to have a column type of whatever, in this case, nvarchar 100. So let me dig a little further into how that works. So we have a new method in the DB context that's exposed called configure conventions. So along with on model building and on configuring. So configure conventions gives us a model configuration builder in the form of an object called configuration builder. Okay, so configuration builder is where, how we can do this now. So with a configuration builder, that's where you see where you can apply the code I just showed you to say all the properties in this whole model, all the ones that are string, go ahead and make their default column type to be an nvarchar 100. So that happens in configure conventions. And you can also do value conversions in bulk as well. So the configuration builder has a have conversion property. So you could do things like say, I want the address type enum, which would by default be stored as integers. I want it to be strings, right? So you could always do this with EF Core. You could, as soon as we got the conversions, you could always do this property by property in a particular class. So yes, this are you talking about this being evil? And varchar max, that's the evil one. There you go. But if that's the one you really want, like most of the time, but then every once in a while you have, a class here, a string there that you want to be differently, then you would just configure those particular properties in on model building, and it would override this. So what's in configure conventions will get read and applied before any configurations that you apply in on model building. So that's the path. And then the last thing, I am with conversions, value conversions. I have my favorite example of something that there literally is no translation between a .NET type and data type in the database, and it's not even a .NET type. It's a struct, but color is, for me, it's such a great example because, you look on the internet to see, Dr. Google, how many people are like, how do I store a color in a .NET color struct in the database? And like, people have all these different ways of doing it. So once we got the value conversions, that was a lot easier. So I don't know if anybody's used value conversions before. There is something to be aware of. Notice I'm not using them. If you're familiar with value conversions, notice that I'm not using the more common way of expressing value conversions. That more common way doesn't work with the bulk conversions. So that's why I'm saying you would have to use a custom converter class to do it. So let me just show you what I mean by that. When you're doing a single property, there's a really easy way to express what the conversion can be. So here's the entity address. It has a property called structure color, which is a color struct, although that was actually referring to like the house color, right? But structure, that was just a coincidence. I only noticed now. I swear, I only just really notice it. Anyway, so with a single property, you can say has conversion, and then you just express what logic it needs to apply when it's writing to the database. So in this case, we're going to take the color struct and just use its toString property. So if the color struct is blue, then it's BLUE, right? And the string blue will get stored in the database. And then for the second parameter, you just say what logic it should follow when it's reading the data out of the database and about to materialize. So here is S is what's coming out of the database. That's the string BLUE, and we're just going to use the color struct from name property and say, create the struct. So it will materialize the property value as an actual struct. So it'll be blue, kind of like an enum. But you can't do this with the bulk conversion. And when I was first testing this out, and it was failing, and I was reading and going, what am I doing wrong? And so I finally asked somebody on the team, and they say, oh, that's not supported with bulk conversions because it won't work with the pre-compilation feature. And I thought, oh, that's cool. I would never have thought of that. I'm sure they figured that out the hard way. But so the easy way is not supported. So if you do want to create bulk conversions, bulk value conversions, you have to create a bulk value conversion class and then apply it. So this is don't worry too much about it. How this you can learn about how that works, but that's what I'm doing here. I've created the class and then I'm just applying it here. So I spend time on that because it was really important to me. So who here, again, can't see anybody. Anybody here using Azure Cosmos DB with EF Core, the Cosmos provider? Yes, it's really, really, really cool to be able to use that. And there's the question of why would I use an ORM for relational relational mapping? Why would I need that with a document database? And for those of you who've never even aren't aware of this, so Cosmos DB is a document database, so it's not a relational database. So why would you need a mapper? And essentially the reason is there's so many people who already know how to use Entity Framework, and they just want to leverage the knowledge they already have instead of having to use other APIs. And the .NET API to interact with Cosmos DB, there's so much ceremony in setting everything up, right? And then but by using the Cosmos DB provider for EF Core takes care of all of that. And I have written the other code, right? It's so illogical to me how that works. It's still important to understand how document databases work and understand how the way you model your domain, model your classes affects how things work, right? So the Cosmos DB provider for EF Core is not like this magic thing. If you've never used Cosmos DB, it's just going to make it easy for you to use Cosmos DB. You should understand what you're doing and understand how the document database works before you take advantage of this. So this wasn't for people, the point was for people who are using Cosmos DB and wanted to use it and knew how to use it and understood what it was for and were using it intentionally. I think that's really what I want to say. For people who are using Cosmos DB intentionally, who already knew how to use EF Core, this is why this exists, just to take advantage of it. And Sean said, yeah, that Cosmos provider, little by little, it's getting more features. And so in EF Core 6, it definitely got a lot of love. And in EF Core 7, it's getting a lot more love. And there are some big fans, especially Jeremy Lickness, who's the PM of all of .NET data, including Entity Framework Core. He loves Cosmos DB. So he is definitely behind a lot of that. So I'll show you some of the interesting things. And again, for somebody who uses, like somebody who applies and loves domain-driven design and the things I learned from domain-driven design about designing my domains in a domain-driven design way. This is really important. Document databases can do something that relational databases can't. It can nest data, right? In relational databases, you have to have relationships. So an Entity Framework understands, hey, if I'm targeting the document database, I should just go ahead and nest the data, the documents, right? Because that's clearly the intention, especially when you're using complex types, right? Complex types naturally make sense to be nested. So if you have a complex type, in other words, you're using owns one or owns many. And personally, I've never had a reason to use owns many. I think it's kind of an anti-pattern, but won't talk about that. If you're using a complex type and you're using the Cosmos DB provider, you do not need to specify owns one. It will figure it out. It will understand it, and it will go ahead and nest them. So you don't even have to say that this is owned, like that this name type is owned by the person type. It'll figure it out. You don't have to do it. With a relational database, because you're tricking the relational database into doing something weird, you do have to specify owns one or owns many. The other interesting thing that we'll do is if you have related objects, so for example, you've got person with addresses. If you do not have a DB set for address in your context, it will also nest the address inside of its parent when it stores it. So that's what this second one is. So the first one, yeah, I did something wrong with my animation here. So like, don't look at the right-hand side, right? The left-hand side is about how it automatically will nest and store the complex type. The right side is what you'll see if you have an addresses type. It's not a complex type, it's an actual entity that has an ID, but there's no DB set in my context, so it will nest them also. So this, I think, is beautiful. I really, really like that. There's also a more rich details in the logger. So this is information that is really useful. And so, that's another improvement, that they've got more logging details when you're doing Cosmos DB. This also is really cool. Again, taking advantage of something that a document database can do. So a document database is essentially storing JSON documents, right? And they can be nested. So a relational database cannot handle collections or dictionaries of primitive types. So if you have something like this code over here, person.nicknames equals a new list of string, right? You can't, there's no way to store that in a database, a regular relational database, but you can very easily build JSON that represents that. And because you can build JSON, then you can have a document that you can store in your document database, right? So that's what this is showing. So before I move forward, Sean, are any of these some of the things that will make you a little more happy, or there's still more that you're looking for? Because there's more work being done in EF Core 7. Yes, collections of, collections of primitives did not work in EF Core with the Cosmos provider, right? But they're like, duh, this makes a lot of sense. Let's support it. So there it is. So I hope that, yes, makes you happy. Like smiley face. Okay, so group by is something that I have been very happy to be able to avoid. I hate doing the mind of trying to comprehend group by, and luckily I haven't had to deal with it too much. So when I saw that there's more EF6 parity for group by, and there's a lot of people who care for group by, I was like, okay, I have to learn how to, do this, be a little smarter about this stuff. So for those of you who've been waiting for better group by support, one of the really cool things you can do now is dig into the navigations. So if you're doing a group by, so I'll just back up and explain this instead of just hand waving. So I'm querying people and addresses. So I've got navigations, I'm doing eager loading, and I'm grouping by a property of people. So normally you would just be able to get aggregate information about that related data. But now you can drill into the related data and get access to its properties. And that's something that people have really been clamoring for. Because you have access to the properties, that also means you can return the full entities, right? When it's no longer just limited to aggregates, it will return actual details of entities. So that is huge for group by, and I, again, as I was like, oh, I guess I better, get a little smarter about group by. I started reading the issues in GitHub around these and realized, like, it was so frequently asked for. Really, really big thing people have been asking for. And also you can project into entities as well, right? It's all this business about group by is no longer limited to returning aggregate information. It actually returns full entities and including full entities of related objects. So it's a really, really big deal and will solve a lot of problems that people have been complaining about for a while. Another capability of the fact that we have access to those full entities is another feature people have asked so many times. How do you do this? How do you do this? I need to be able to do this, is to be able to return first, like if you're doing a group by and you want to just get the first thing back, right? Because it didn't return entities before, you couldn't get it back. You couldn't get a thing back. All you could get back was the aggregates. So now people ask for this a lot also, just to be able to give me back the first result of that grouping. So there's for people who love grouping. Oh, and wait, there's one more. Yeah, this was as well as first. You can get the first 10 or the first 15 or the first 2 or whatever, right? With the top N. So that also is supported. So again, all of this is related to the fact that it's now returning full entities, not just aggregates. So you have access to all that information. Okay, I want to see one person at least. I know it's a small group, but is there one person here who's like really excited about this? Like, oh, finally. Okay, fine. Who cares about group by? Just kidding. Tiny little, not tiny for everybody, but if you're using any of the minimal API stuff in ASP.NET Core, just an FYI that when you're in the program file configuring things, that of course you can configure the DB context services also when you're setting that stuff up. So just a little thing. Another little thing, this is a tiny little thing, but the team has been messing around with the ordering of columns in DB migrations for a really long time. So now we were in Entity Framework able to control the order, and now you can do that again if you want to. So there's Fluent API and data attributes. I don't like data attributes. This is actually pretty cool for those who need it, but you just have more access to being able to do free text search on SQL Server. So it's just a lot more flexible. So it's mapped to, I can't even remember because I'm just like tired now. But the point is, oh, okay, right, free text search. So if you've got the JSON stuff stored as JSON, for example, you can actually do searching within that. So you can map that and then be able to access it. So it's all serialized. So that's a really, really narrow case, but again, for the people who have been wanting it, it's a really, really big deal. Oh, and there, okay, that's what it is. So you can set it up. If it's set up as JSON, now link queries with a contains function will give you access to it, right? So we have the ability to do it now. EF Core 5 did not support it, and EF Core 6 does. Can you tell I like totally forgot about that one? And I'm like, oh, right, this slide says this slide says that, because I've not tangled with free text search with JSON before. But as I, dug into this when I was building this presentation, I realized that that was actually a pretty cool thing for people who need that. Somebody asked me to talk about this last time I did this presentation, just to make sure people are aware of the stand-ups that the EF team does. It's they're amazing. And there's just a Bitly shortcut for EF Core stand-ups. So you can find those on YouTube, or, sign up to get reminder to attend another one. So it's not always just the team. They bring in other people to show off stuff, or like Eric Alskop Jensen, who creates the EF Core Power Tools and some other amazing extensions. Like, he'll be on there and showing some of his tools that he's working on. John P. Smith, who writes the really great EF Core books. He is really, really smart. And he goes, he's on there and he talks about things. So they brought the Dapper guys on to talk about Dapper, and yeah, so those stand-ups are really great. If you've never been on any one of those, just a quick look at my friends on the NA Framework Core team. Bryce has been around for a really, really long time, and Maurice also, Smith also, and that's Jeremy, who's like the program manager, and Arthur, who just got recently married and is on his, yes, I've been on the stand-up a few times. And I don't know if he's back from his honeymoon in Greece yet, but he actually did the most recent stand-up from his honeymoon in Greece. Like, come on, get a break, take a break. I started taking this this presentation. The first time I did it, I had to do it in an hour. It was for a conference, and it drove me crazy because I just wanted to, as you can tell, I just wanted to talk and talk and talk and talk about these features. And so I was like, I'm just going to go and create a video and just say as much as I want to about a thing, and I'm just going to do a whole series. And I got through the first two. Just talking about those first two performance things. There's an hour where I'm talking about the performance, because I was saying what I wanted to say. Actually, no, this is just the first one is just the query performance. The second one, I talked about the compiled models. And then I started working on my 7.5-hour Pluralsight course, so I haven't done any more yet. Anyway, so those are there if you want to learn a little more about those. So, oh yes, I got to update that slide. Coming in late winter. What? No, that's stupid. It's out already. It just got released at the beginning of this month. I guess I was drunk when I wrote that slide, or maybe Pluralsight was giving me a hard time. Who knows? Anyway, that course is out. And I'll make sure Sam has this deck. So if you want any of these links, there they are. This one down here, announcing EF Core 6 Preview 4, this is the blog post where Shai digs into a lot of the stuff that happened with performance. Anyway, so there's a whole bunch of links, and that's me when I have makeup on, I have my hair nice, and all my contact information. So that's it. Oh my gosh, 7:58. How'd I do?
Did
That
great.
wasn't intentional. I was like, oh, I'll try to do it in an hour and 15 minutes, but like, oh, 8 o'clock. Okay.
Hey, it's all good. A lot of great content. I don't think anyone's complaining.
All right. Well, it's a lot of fun. In case it wasn't obvious, except when bundling wasn't working. And then when I forgot to re-enable the C# extension in Visual Studio Code.
The demo gods always strike when the opportunity presents itself, so don't feel bad.
The reality gods, right? It's like, it's what we all struggle with these things. So
Oh, yeah.
that was just, so you see, like, yeah, I do too.
But I'm pretty sure everyone knows that you've done Entity Framework once or twice before, so.
Yeah, I can usually just go, well, you believe me, right?
Right, absolutely.
Cred there. Yeah, but it just drives me crazy. But that was pretty funny. I was like, all right, I swear, this is the last time I'm going to try it, and then it worked.
That's all good. Thank you, Julie. Highly appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks again, and thanks for coming in for all the feedback. Thanks.
Before the folks leave, I just have a couple of wrap-up announcements. So if you don't mind, Julie, I'll take back the screen.
Do I have to do anything? Nope.
No, I got it. Thank you, though. And let me post a few links in chat. Where did it go? And same thing, when I need to find something, I can't find it. All right, let's try that again. Okay, so there's a few links posted in chat, and we'll go over those in just a little bit. And going over here. All right, so thanks again to Julie for a great presentation. As far as resources, you'll have the link for the YouTube channel posted in the chat window. The recording will be edited and will be uploaded within the next few days. Please subscribe to the channel to get upload notifications. Tech events, which we'll cover in just a little bit, those will be posted on my blog, samnasser.blogspot.com, and likewise also invite you to subscribe so you get the updates immediately. And last but not least, the feedback eval. The link for that is posted in the chat, so please take a minute to fill out the eval so we can provide Julie some feedback. For those that joined us late, a special offer from Manning.com, 35% off on a selection of books, with the link at deals.manning.com and the discount code MTPCLEC21, and that's also posted in the chat window as well. All right, so some upcoming events. Obviously, there's always a lot of user groups and conferences happening. This is just a snapshot of what's happening. So on June 8th is the Azure Cleveland user group that's going to be meeting virtually, and that's always meets on the second Wednesday. On June 16th, which is the third Thursday of the month, is the GLUD.net, or the Great Lakes Users Group for .net. And that's going to be meeting on June 16th. And then on June 23rd is the June meeting of this group, where we're going to have Seth Juarez talking about Ask Me Anything on machinelearning.net. So bring your questions. Bring any problems you may have had with ML.net, and he'll be ready to tackle them on. Some of the virtual conferences that are happening, June 6th through the 10th, is OWASP App Security in Europe. They're going to be held virtually, and that's going to be from June 6th through the 10th, with a link posted right below there. On July 29th in Columbus, the in-person event of JavaScript and Friends is going to be happening there. And at the same time, on the same Friday, is Cincy Deliver, which will be happening in Cincinnati, as you might have guessed. They've already announced the keynote speaker. Doc Norton is going to be speaking there. And then on August 8th through the 10th is KCDC, or Kansas City Developers Conference. And the link for that is kcdc.info. And last but certainly not least, August 17th through the 19th, you can join me in Louisville. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Louisville, Kentucky, for codepalooza.com. And I believe they're going to be having a hybrid in-person as well as virtual. I will be there in person. So hope you can all join me. One of the things that we always like to talk about are job openings. So Tech Systems always has jobs available at techsystems.com/itjobs. But I always like to ask if anyone's hiring, please make yourself known either verbally or in chat. And likewise, if you're looking, please let me know or make yourself known. So anyone hiring or looking for work? Going once, twice. All right, glad to see everyone's gainfully employed. For a wrap up, my contact information if needed, snasser@nistechnologies.com. You can also find me on Twitter @SamNasser. And the link to my blog again is samnasser.blogspot.com. And I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. So with that, thank you all for attending. Julie, thanks again for a great presentation, very informative. And thank you for taking the time. I know you need to catch up with your husband at the bar with some friends, correct?
Yeah, they're probably heading home soon. Maybe they'll bring me something.
There you go. All right. Well, thanks again for your time, and thank you all for attending, and have a great night. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.